The HOA paved over my $180,000 private road overnight. By morning, all 58 of their cars were gone. I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery at 2 a.m., and when I pulled back the curtain, I saw it. 3 asphalt trucks and a crew of workers tearing up the gravel path that cut across the edge of my property. The private road I had built and paid for myself, every single dollar of it. By the time I threw on boots and ran outside, they had already laid a quarter of the fresh asphalt, bright black and steaming in the August night, and standing in the cone of a work. Light with a clipboard and a smug expression was Diane Holloway, president of the Maplewood Ridge Homeowners Association, wearing a HOA-branded vest like she was the mayor of something. "You don't own this road anymore," she said before I could even open my mouth, and she held up a document that had the HOA seal stamped on it in red ink. And in that moment I felt something cold and absolute settle in my chest. Not panic, not grief, but the specific kind of fury that only comes when someone has planned your destruction very carefully, and you realize you have been patient with them for far too long. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 43 years old, a licensed civil engineer, and I moved my family, my wife Dana and our 2 kids, Lily and Owen, to Maplewood Ridge 6 years ago because we thought the suburban quiet and the good school district were worth the trade-offs. We were wrong about the trade-offs. The house we bought sat on a corner lot at the edge of the subdivision, with an access road running along the eastern boundary, a road I had commissioned, permitted, and built with $180,000 of my own money after the original HOA-maintained path on that side collapsed in a storm and they refused to repair it for 2 years. I had a surveyor confirm the road sat entirely within my property lines. I had an attorney review the easement documentation. I had the county road department inspect and sign off on the construction. Every I was dotted. I wasn't just careful, I was meticulous because even then, 6 years in, I already knew what Diane Holloway was capable of. Diane had been HOA president for 11 years. She ran Maplewood Ridge the way a feudal lord runs a fiefdom, with absolute confidence that the rules existed to protect her preferences, not the community's rights. She had fined a widow named Gloria Chin $300 for putting wind chimes on her porch. She had threatened to report a veteran named Ray Kowalski to code enforcement because his truck was parked 2 inches over the driveway boundary line. I had watched all of it from a careful distance, stayed out of HOA politics, paid my dues on time, kept my lawn trimmed to exactly the right height. I thought if I was invisible enough, she would have no reason to look at me. That was the first mistake people made with Diane, assuming she needed a reason. The road became a target the moment other residents started using it. Because my private road connected to the far end of the subdivision more efficiently than the main HOA road, which Diane had conveniently rerouted 2 years ago to run past her own house, neighbors started cutting through my property with my permission, just out of goodwill. Diane noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything that wasn't under her control, and the fact that 18 families were routing their morning commute along a road she didn't manage, didn't approve, and couldn't charge fees for was, I would later understand, an obsession she had been feeding quietly for months before she made her move. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday in March. HOA letterhead, Diane's signature at the bottom, and a single paragraph informing me that my privately constructed accessway was in violation of HOA Community Standard 7.4b, which restricted construction of permanent infrastructure without board approval. She was citing a bylaw I had never seen before, because it didn't exist when I built the road. I called my attorney, Claire Oduya, who had handled my original road permits and was now reading the letter with the kind of focused silence that meant she was already calculating. She amended the bylaws, Claire told me, 6 months ago, quietly. The amendment passed at a meeting you weren't notified about. That was the second move in a game Diane had been playing since before I laid the first stone of that road. Claire sent a response letter within 48 hours. The amendment was procedurally invalid, Proper notice to all residents was required by the HOA's own governing documents, and Diane had skipped that step. We cited the exact section. We attached the documentation. We sent it certified mail. Diane signed for it on a Thursday. By Friday, she had issued a new letter doubling the fine and adding a non-compliance surcharge. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that second letter while Owen was doing homework at the other end of the table and Lily was watching something on her tablet in the living room, and Dana was standing at the counter watching me read, and I looked up and she said, "How bad?" And I said, "She's not stopping." And Dana nodded very slowly, the way she does when she's already decided something. Dana is a forensic accountant. She has spent 15 years finding money that people tried to hide, tracing financial patterns in documents that look boring but tell devastating stories. When she nodded that night, I didn't know yet what she was quietly deciding to start looking for. That detail would matter very much later. I filed a formal complaint with the county's HOA oversight office. The woman on the phone was sympathetic in the way that bureaucrats are sympathetic. She told me the complaint would be reviewed within 90 days and that the HOA would be given the opportunity to respond. 90 days. Diane would not need 90 days to make more moves. 2 weeks after the second letter, a crew of HOA landscapers showed up and planted a row of 6-foot arborvitae shrubs directly along the fence line adjacent to my road, on HOA common land that happened to be positioned perfectly to block sight lines from my driveway to the intersection. It was a legal move. It was also a clear message. She was telling me she could make my life smaller, one well-placed shrub at a time. I documented everything. Every letter, every dated photograph, every email. I had learned, from watching Diane work, that she kept impeccable records of what she did to people and nearly none of what those people did in response, because she assumed the asymmetry in her favor was permanent. I was quietly building the opposite kind of record. In May, she called a special HOA meeting, proper notice this time because Claire had made clear we were watching, and put a new resolution to a vote. The HOA would exercise eminent domain authority over private roads within subdivision boundaries under a clause in the original CC and RS. I read the agenda the night before and felt the room tilt slightly beneath me. I had never noticed that clause. Neither had Claire. Neither had the county oversight office, apparently, because no one had ever tried to use it. I drove to that meeting with a legal pad and 3 pens. Dana came with me. We sat in the 3rd row of the community room at the Maplewood Ridge Clubhouse, and I watched Diane run the meeting the way a conductor runs an orchestra she has already rehearsed privately. Calm, theatrical, inevitable. The vote passed 14-9. 14 people who trusted her or feared her or both. The 9 who voted against included Ray Kowalski, who caught my eye across the room afterward and gave me the kind of nod that means, "I'm sorry, and also I'm not surprised." Ray had been fighting Diane for 3 years over a completely different issue, the placement of a flagpole on his property, and he had the look of a man who had lost rounds but hadn't lost the war. That distinction was going to matter. Claire filed for a temporary restraining order the next morning. The legal argument was solid. The eminent domain clause in the CC and RS had never been recorded with the county, which meant it was unenforceable as written, and even if it had been, HOA eminent domain authority in our state required a supermajority vote of all dues-paying members, not just a quorum of attendees. The judge granted the TRO within 48 hours. Diane responded by filing a countermotion. Her attorney was a man named Preston Hale, who had a downtown office and a website that featured a photo of him standing in front of a bookcase of leather-bound volumes with his arms crossed, which I mention because it is exactly the kind of attorney you hire when you want to project authority rather than win on merit. He filed a lot of paper, impressive-looking paper, largely empty paper. The weeks that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Legal filings, counterfilings, hearings scheduled and rescheduled, and in between all of it, normal life. I drove Lily to soccer practice. Owen had a science fair project about water filtration that he was very serious about. Dana made chili on Sundays. We ate dinner together every night and tried not to bring the HOA to the table with us, and mostly failed. One evening in June, Dana looked up from her laptop with an expression I had learned to recognize, the slightly unfocused look she gets when a number is telling her something. "Marcus," she said, "I've been going through the HOA's publicly filed financial disclosures." I asked her what she found. She said, "The maintenance fund for the East Side roads, the ones she rerouted, shows $340,000 in expenditures over the past 2 years. But when I cross-reference with the county contractor records, the actual work billed only comes to about $190,000. I set down my fork. "That's a $150,000 gap," I said. "Yes," said Dana. "It is." She spent 3 more weeks building the picture quietly, pulling every public record she could access, county filings, contractor licenses, payment records, the HOA's annual disclosures to the state registry. She was not yet certain what she had found, but she was building a case the way she always does. Slowly, methodically, with the patience of someone who has learned that the numbers always tell the truth if you listen long enough. In July, the restraining order hearing became a full injunction hearing, and we spent 2 days in a conference room with Claire and Diane's attorney trading arguments about the legal validity of the CC&R eminent domain clause. I sat through 16 hours of legal procedure and watched Preston Hale make confident statements that Claire dismantled with such precise, almost cheerful efficiency that at one point even the mediator looked like he was suppressing a smile. The injunction was granted. The HOA could not move to seize or alter my private road pending a full trial on the underlying property rights claim. Diane, sitting across the table in a blazer the color of a stop sign, did not blink. She gathered her documents and left without speaking. Preston Hale told the room that his client was reviewing her options. Ray Kowalski, who had come as a witness and stayed for the whole thing, bought me a coffee from the lobby vending machine afterward and said, "She's not done." I said I knew. He said, "Neither are we." What I did not know then was that Ray had his own file on Diane Holloway, 3 years deep, covering not just the flagpole dispute but documented instances of selective fine enforcement, a pattern of code complaints filed against residents who had voted against her in past elections, and 2 prior incidents in which she had hired contractors for HOA work and paid them through a shell company with a different name that, Dana would eventually confirm, traced back to a LLC registered to Diane's brother-in-law. Ray brought the file to our house on a Saturday morning in early August. He spread it across our kitchen table. Printouts, photos, certified letter receipts, a spreadsheet he had built himself. And Dana looked at it for about 4 minutes and then said very quietly, "Ray, I think you and I need to work together." Ray said, "Ma'am, I was hoping you'd say that." That was the moment the balance began, slowly and invisibly, to shift. I kept the legal fight visible. Appearances, hearings, filings, while Dana and Ray worked in the background building the financial picture. It was a division of effort that felt natural and also slightly strategic because Diane was watching me, and people who watch one thing tend to miss what's happening adjacent to it. She was focused on the road. She was not focused on the numbers. In the 3rd week of August, I got a text from a neighbor named Priya Nair, who lived 4 houses from the clubhouse. Priya was a quiet woman who had never been involved in HOA disputes, who kept a beautiful garden and waved when you drove past and otherwise kept to herself. The text said, "I think you should know. I was at the clubhouse yesterday and I heard Diane on the phone. She was talking about the road. She said, 'We move this weekend.'" I forwarded it to Claire immediately. Claire called me within 10 minutes. She said the injunction covered any official HOA action to alter or seize the road. If Diane moved on the road directly, without a court order, she would be in contempt. I said, "Do you think she knows that?" Claire was quiet for a second, and then she said, I think she knows and has decided she doesn't care. That was the moment I understood that Diane had stopped playing a legal game and started playing a different kind of game, the kind where you act first and make other people react. I set up a motion-activated camera on the eastern fence line that Saturday evening. Not a cheap one, a professional-grade unit with night vision and cloud backup, the kind I used on job sites. I pointed it at the road. I told Dana what I'd done. She said, "Good." Then she went back to her laptop. She had been working on something for 3 days that she hadn't fully explained to me yet, and when Dana works like that, you don't ask, you wait. I went to bed at 11. The camera triggered at 1:47 a.m. The footage showed Diane arriving in her SUV at 1:52 a.m., followed by 3 contractor trucks, unmarked, which I noted, and a crew of 12 workers who began unloading equipment with the practiced efficiency of people who had been briefed in advance and paid enough to ask no questions. Diane stood to the side with her clipboard, pointing and directing, calm as if she were supervising a Sunday afternoon community cleanup. By the time I got outside, they had already torn up the gravel base at the northern entrance to the road and were laying fresh asphalt. The smell hit me first, that sharp, petroleum-heavy scent that sticks to your clothes and your memory. Then the noise. Then Diane, turning toward me with an expression I can only describe as the look of someone who has been waiting a very long time for this specific moment. "This road is now HOA property under Resolution 22B, she said, which was the name she had given the eminent domain vote that was currently under court injunction. I told her about the injunction. She smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Injunctions are stayed pending appeal, Mr. Webb. My attorney filed the appeal yesterday at 4 p.m. I felt the ground shift under me. She had planned this precisely. The appeal filing was the mechanism. The overnight timing was the execution. I called Claire at 2:08 a.m. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting the call. She listened to me describe what I was seeing, asked 2 questions, and then said, "Okay, document everything. I'll have an emergency motion filed when the courthouse opens at 8. In the meantime, call the non-emergency police line and have them send someone out to document the trespass." I did all 3 things simultaneously, standing in the August night in my boots with asphalt cooling 20 feet from me. The officer who arrived at 3:15 a.m. was a young man named Deputy Franks, who walked the scene carefully, took photographs, spoke briefly with Diane, who handed him a copy of the appeal filing and a copy of Resolution 22B with the confidence of someone who had prepared a press kit, and then came back to me and said, in the careful neutral tone of a man trying very hard not to have an opinion, "Sir, there's a legal dispute here that I'm not really equipped to adjudicate. I'll file an incident report, and you'll want to let your attorney handle the civil side of this." Diane's crew finished the road by 5:30 a.m. Smooth black asphalt, perfectly even, with new HOA standard white striping down the center. They even put up 2 small green signs at either end that said, "Maplewood Ridge Common Property." She had brought the signs. She had packed them in the truck. She had thought of everything. By 6 a.m. she was gone, and I was standing in the early light looking at $180,000 of my private property, wearing a new coat of someone else's paint. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table. Dana came downstairs at 6:15 and found me there. She looked out the window at the road, said nothing for a moment, and then set a mug of coffee in front of me and sat down across the table. "She finished it," I said. Dana said, "I know." I said, "She actually did it." Dana said, "Yes." Then she opened her laptop and turned it toward me and said, "I finished mine too." What Dana showed me was a 47-page forensic financial analysis of the Maplewood Ridge HOA's expenditures over the past 4 years. She had built it from public records, county contractor filings, the HOA's own annual disclosures, and the supplementary documentation that Ray had collected. The $150,000 gap she had found in June was, in the full picture, part of a pattern totaling, conservatively, she said, using only numbers she could document beyond reasonable doubt, $412,000 in HOA funds that had been routed through contractor invoices to the LLC registered to Diane's brother-in-law. She had not told me the full number before because she wanted to be certain. She was certain now. She had been building toward this for months with the same methodical patience she brought to every case in her professional life. While Diane had been playing a property rights game, Dana had been playing a financial crime game, and those are not the same game, and Diane had no idea the second game was being played at all. I read the analysis slowly, all 47 pages, while the coffee got cold. When I finished, I looked up at Dana and said, "This is real." She said, "Every number is sourced and documented. I can take it to the DA's office today." I said, "Not yet." She raised an eyebrow. I said, "I want her to see it coming." Dana looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Okay, but we move fast." I said, "Yes, we move fast." Claire arrived at our house at 8:30 a.m. with her own laptop and a paralegal named Josh who set up at our dining room table like he was deploying for a military operation. Claire had already filed the emergency motion to have Diane held in contempt for violating the injunction. She reviewed Dana's financial analysis with the focused speed of someone who reads documents for a living, and at the end she said, "This is enough for a criminal referral. This is more than enough." She picked up her phone and called someone. I heard her say the name Greg Tillman. I didn't know who Greg Tillman was yet. Greg Tillman, it turned out, was an assistant district attorney who had successfully prosecuted 3 HOA fraud cases in our county in the past 5 years, the most recent of which had resulted in a 12-year sentence for a HOA treasurer in the eastern part of the county who had embezzled $280,000. Claire had worked with him before. She trusted him. More relevantly, he was already interested in Maplewood Ridge. He had received a complaint, filed 6 months earlier by Ray Kowalski, that he had been quietly investigating but couldn't advance without financial documentation. Dana had just given him the documentation. While Claire handled the legal machinery, I made one more move of my own. I sent a single email, no subject line, no greeting, just a PDF attachment, to every email address in the Maplewood Ridge HOA membership directory. The PDF was a 2-page summary of Dana's financial findings, written in plain English, with the source citations listed at the bottom. I sent it at 10:17 a.m. I did not send one to Diane. I wanted her to hear about it from her neighbors first. The replies started coming in within 20 minutes. Some were shocked. Some were angry. Several came from people who had paid fines, been harassed, or lost HOA disputes to Diane and were now reading, in clean black and white numbers, that the woman who had fined them for wind chimes had been funneling their dues money to her family for years. By noon, my inbox had 43 replies and my phone had 7 missed calls, 5 of which were from people I barely knew but who suddenly had a great deal to say. 2 of the calls were from HOA board members who had voted with Diane in May. Both of them said, in almost identical language, that they had not known, that they were appalled, that they wanted to cooperate with any investigation. I believed at least one of them. The other one, a man named Carl Briggs who had been Diane's treasurer for 9 years, I believed somewhat less, and I forwarded his call to Claire without comment and let her form her own opinion. The call I had been waiting for came at 2:34 p.m. It was Diane. She did not introduce herself. She said, "You need to stop what you're doing." Her voice was level, controlled in the way that very controlled people get when they are fighting hard to stay controlled. I said, "Good afternoon, Diane." She said, "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I said, "I think I have a reasonably good idea." She said, "This will be retracted. All of it." I said, "The county public records won't be." She hung up. I sat with that call for a minute. It was the first time I had heard her voice without absolute certainty in it. The certainty had always been the armor, the sense that she was operating from a position so secure that no one's resistance could reach it. The voice on the phone at 2:34 p.m. was still controlled, still forceful, but underneath it was something I had not heard from Diane Holloway before. Calculation. She was calculating her options. That meant she knew she had fewer than before. At 3:15 p.m., Preston Hale sent Claire a letter offering to discuss a resolution of all outstanding matters between the HOA and the Webb family. Claire texted me a screenshot with a single word, "Interesting." I texted back, "Not yet." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which from Claire meant she agreed with the strategy. We were not going to settle. We were going to let it finish. The contempt hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Greg Tillman's office executed a preservation order on the HOA's financial records on Wednesday afternoon, which meant every document, every email, every electronic file in the HOA's possession was legally frozen and required to be produced. Carl Briggs, the treasurer, hired his own attorney by Wednesday evening. That was the second number I heard that sounded like something cracking. Thursday morning, I put on the suit I had worn to my father's funeral and driven Owen to school and dropped Lily at my sister's house, because I didn't want either of them in a courtroom. Dana came with me. Ray Kowalski was already in the parking lot of the courthouse when we arrived, wearing a button-down shirt and holding a manila folder that I suspected contained everything he'd collected over 3 years. He held the door for us. The three of us walked in together. The contempt hearing lasted 4 hours. Preston Hale's argument was that the appeal filing had effectively stayed the injunction under state procedural rules, and therefore Diane's actions the previous Sunday night had not technically violated a court order. Claire's counterargument was precise and lethal. The specific rule Hale cited applied only to appeals of final orders, and an injunction pending trial is not a final order. And Hale knew that, and filing the appeal with the intent to manufacture a pretext for overnight construction was itself a sanctionable manipulation of the court's process. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Ewan, who had the kind of face that showed nothing and the kind of eyes that saw everything, listened to both sides, asked 4 pointed questions that made Preston Hale pause in a way that senior attorneys only pause when a question has found a hole in their argument, and then took a 30-minute recess. When she came back, she found Diane in contempt of court, ordered the asphalt removed at HOA expense and the road restored to its original condition within 14 days, and sanctioned Preston Hale's firm $8,500 for what she called procedural bad faith. It was, Claire told me afterward, a genuinely rare outcome. Judges almost never sanction attorneys. Judge Ewan had made it look easy. Diane sat at the defendant's table through the full ruling without visible expression. She was good at that, the performance of composure. But when the judge finished and attorneys began packing their bags, I saw Diane's hand, flat on the table beside her legal pad, press down slightly. Just slightly, and stay there, like she needed something to push against. Outside the courthouse, in the afternoon light, Ray shook my hand and then hugged Dana, which surprised both of them and made Dana laugh. He said he hadn't heard about Judge Ewan's sanctions in years. I said she seemed like the right judge for this case. He said, "The right judge and the right timing." I asked what he meant by timing. He said, "Greg Tillman called me this morning. They're moving faster than I expected." I asked how fast. He said, "Weekend, maybe." I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a while before going inside. The road was still there, newly asphalted, with its HOA signs. It would be restored within 14 days, per the court order. But I had stopped thinking about the road. The road was a symptom. The disease was something Diane had been running for 11 years, and the treatment for that was not an injunction or a contempt ruling. It was a federal fraud investigation and a DA who had wanted to build this case for months and now had everything he needed to finish building it. Dana made pasta for dinner. Owen talked about a baseball game at school. Lily showed me a drawing she had made of our dog, a beagle named Clover, that was remarkably good for a 9-year-old. Normal life, moving around the shape of everything else the way water moves around a stone. I was grateful for it. I needed the reminder that the thing I was protecting was the life inside the house, not just the road outside it. Friday came and went quietly. Saturday morning, Dana and I were having coffee when Priyanair texted me again. Police at Diane's house. 2 cars. Thought you should know. I showed Dana. She looked at it and said, "Okay, just that. Okay." Like it was the next logical thing that was always going to happen. I did not go drive past Diane's house. I did not call anyone. I stayed home, went to Owen's baseball game in the afternoon, ate dinner with my family, and let things happen without needing to watch them happen. That restraint cost me something. I am not a patient man by nature, and the urge to know was real, but I had learned from this whole affair that the best moves are the ones you make from stillness. Greg Tillman called me Sunday evening. He didn't say much, he couldn't legally, but he said that the investigation was proceeding, that my family's cooperation had been essential, and that the financial documentation Dana had provided was exactly the kind of work we needed. He thanked me. I said Dana deserved the thanks. He said, "Please tell her." I did. She nodded and went back to whatever she was reading. That's Dana. On Monday morning, a crew appeared on my road. Not Diane's crew, a different one, hired by the HOA board under the terms of the court order, now operating under emergency oversight from a 3-member committee that had replaced Diane pending the outcome of the investigation. They began removing the asphalt layer by layer carefully because underneath it, still intact, still structurally sound, was the gravel base I had laid. My road, still there. I watched the removal from my kitchen window with a coffee cup in my hand, and Clover sat at my feet, and the September light came through the window at that low angle that makes everything look slightly golden. And I thought about the night 6 years ago when Dana and I had stood in this kitchen for the first time, in an empty house that smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and decided this was the place we wanted to build something. I still believed that. Diane Holloway had not managed to make me stop believing it. That felt like the most important victory of all. The formal indictment came on a Wednesday 6 weeks after the contempt hearing. Diane Holloway was charged with 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of theft by deception, and 1 count of conspiracy, relating to the $412,000 in HOA funds that Dana had documented flowing through her brother-in-law's LLC. Carl Briggs, the treasurer, was charged with 2 counts as a co-conspirator. Preston Hale was not charged, but his firm parted ways with Diane the day after the indictment, a detail I heard from Claire with something close to satisfaction. The indictment was covered by the local news. A reporter I had never heard of published a story that was accurate, careful, and included a quote from an unnamed HOA resident who described Diane as having run the association like her personal kingdom. Ray Kowalski called me after he read the story and said, "That unnamed resident was me. I figured I'd been unnamed for long enough." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Diane pleaded not guilty. Her new attorney, Preston Hale's successor, was a quieter, more careful lawyer than Hale, the kind who wins more often, which I found briefly alarming until Claire reminded me that the documentary evidence was overwhelming and that Greg Tillman had tried 4 cases just like this one. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. In the meantime, Diane was released on bail and, under the terms of the bond, could not hold any HOA office or participate in HOA governance in any capacity. The fiefdom was vacant. The neighborhood changed after that. Slowly at first, then faster. With Diane gone from the board, the new committee, which included Ray and, after a special election in October, Priyanair and a retired teacher named Mrs. Beaumont, who had been fined 14 times in 3 years and was absolutely done being quiet about it, began reviewing the HOA's enforcement history systematically. Wind chimes were unilaterally permitted. Flagpoles were approved. 17 outstanding fines were reviewed and the majority were reversed or reduced. It was not a revolution. It was more like a deep breath the neighborhood had been holding for 11 years. My road was fully restored in October, 4 days ahead of the 14-day deadline. The county inspector who signed off on the restoration told me it had been built to spec and was in excellent structural condition. I thanked him. He said, "Good road." I said, "Yes, it is." I meant it literally and also not entirely literally. Lily went back to using the road to walk to her friend Maisie's house, the shortcut that had always been the whole point of it. Owen rode his bike down it on a Saturday morning and waved at me from the end, that particular wave that 11-year-old boys give when they think something is normal and good. I waved back. Clover stood at the fence and watched him go with what I can only describe as professional interest. In November, I received a letter from the County HOA Oversight Office, the same office I had filed the complaint with a year earlier. The letter informed me that my complaint had been reviewed, that violations had been found, and that the matter had been referred to appropriate authorities. 90 days, they had said. It had taken considerably longer. I filed the letter in the folder with everything else and did not dwell on the timing. Dana and I had dinner with Ray and his wife Pam in December, at a Mexican place near the subdivision entrance that had opened that summer and which Ray said he had been waiting for a reason to try. We ate enchiladas and talked about things that had nothing to do with HOAs, Ray's grandkids, a trip Pam wanted to take to Portugal, Owen's new obsession with astronomy, Lily's soccer tournament coming up in the spring. It was a good dinner. The kind of dinner that feels ordinary and therefore significant. I thought about that night. The August night, the machinery, the asphalt smell, Diane with her clipboard in the cone of light, and how certain she had been. How thoroughly she had planned it. How much work she had put into a scheme that she believed was invulnerable because she had controlled so much for so long that invulnerability had started to feel like a fact rather than a condition. Power does that to people. It makes the edges of what's possible feel like the edges of what is. She had not accounted for Dana. She had not accounted for Ray's 3-year file. She had not accounted for the camera I set up on Saturday evening, or for Judge Ewan's particular reading of procedural bad faith, or for Greg Tillman, or for the 43 emails I got back from neighbors who had been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to show them what the numbers said. She had accounted for me, for the visible opponent, the man fighting over the road, and in doing so she had missed everything happening adjacent to that fight. That is the thing about power wielded carelessly. It is always loudest in the direction it's pointed and always blindest to the sides. On a Friday evening in February, I was in the garage tinkering with a project when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Diane Holloway had accepted a plea agreement. 2 felony counts. Restitution of $412,000 to the HOA, 3 years of probation. No jail time, which I knew Greg Tillman had not been happy about, and which Ray Kowalski expressed an opinion about in colorful language when I called him. But the felony convictions meant she could never again serve in any fiduciary or governance role in a HOA or similar organization. Permanently, in any capacity, in our state. I set down the thing I was working on and sat on my workbench for a while. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Clover was asleep in his bed in the corner. Outside, through the side window, I could see the road, my road, in the blue-gray February light, exactly where it had always been, doing exactly what it was built to do. I called Dana, Indiana. She came and stood in the doorway reading the alert on my phone. Then she handed it back to me and said, very simply, good, not triumphant, not celebratory, just good. Like something that had been off balance had finally found its footing. We stood there together for a while, in the garage with the February light coming through the window and Clover asleep in the corner, and I thought about all the people in Maplewood Ridge who had been fined and harassed and diminished and made to feel small by a woman who had decided that her preferences and her power were the same thing. They were not the same thing. They never are. But it takes a specific kind of fight to prove that, and not everyone has the resources or the patience or the particular combination of stubborn and careful that it requires. We had been lucky. I knew that. We had a lawyer like Claire and a forensic accountant sleeping next to me and a neighbor who had kept a 3-year file and a DA who had been waiting for documentation. A lot of people in a lot of Maplewood Ridges across this country fight Diane Holloways without any of those things, and they lose or they settle for less or they simply leave and let the fiefdom stand. I did not feel like I could take full credit for a win that had required so much. But I also knew that I had not made it easy for her. I had documented everything. I had been meticulous with my permits. I had stayed in the fight when it would have been simpler to sell the house and move. I had built a road that lasted. I had married a woman who could read a financial disclosure the way other people read a novel. Fluently, at depth, finding the story that the numbers were telling. None of that was luck. Some of it was just who we are. The spring trial that was no longer happening had been replaced by the plea agreement, and with it went the final formal chapter of the thing. What remained was quieter and ongoing. A neighborhood finding its footing without the weight of 11 years of Diane pressing down on it. A HOA board learning to govern without a monarch, 58 families, who had been part of a system they hadn't examined closely enough and were now examining it, some of them with relief, some with chagrin, most with the complicated mixture of both that genuine community requires. In March, I got a card in the mail. It was from Gloria Chun, the widow who had been fined for wind chimes. She had written, in careful cursive, "Thank you for not giving up. That was all." I put it on the refrigerator, which is where important things go in our house, between Lily's drawing of Clover and a photo of Owen's science fair ribbon. It seemed like the right place for it. By April, the neighborhood felt different in ways that were hard to quantify but easy to feel. People waved more. The April HOA meeting, attended by nearly 40 residents, which Ray told me was the highest turnout in a decade, lasted 90 minutes and covered actual business, and no one was afraid to speak, and 2 proposals were tabled for further community input rather than simply voted through. Small things. But small things are what a community is made of when it's healthy. Lily made the spring soccer tournament and scored 2 goals in the semifinal. Owen's astronomy obsession had evolved into a plan to build his own telescope using a kit he found online, which I was quietly excited about because it gave us a project to do together in the garage on weekends. Clover continued to take his job of watching the road with profound seriousness. Dana started a new case. A corporate one which she can't talk about, but which has her working with the same focused ferocity that makes her so good at what she does. I finished a retaining wall project on the back slope of our property in May, a job I had been putting off for 2 years because the legal fight had absorbed so much of my mental bandwidth. It was straightforward engineering work, grading, drainage calculation, block placement, and I found the simplicity of it genuinely restorative. The pleasure of a problem that had a correct answer and yielded to technical precision without the additional dimension of human malice. One evening in late May, I walked the full length of my road at dusk. From the northern entrance to the southern exit, measuring it with my feet the way I had the first time, when the surveyor had staked the lines and I had stood on my own land in my work boots with the plans rolled under my arm and thought, "This will be useful. This will serve the people who live here." That had been the whole point. Not ownership for its own sake. Not power. Just a road that served the people who needed to use it. The simplest possible thing. I think about Diane sometimes. Not with hatred that ran out a while ago, but with something closer to the professional interest of an engineer who has witnessed a structure fail. She built something out of absolute certainty and the slow accumulation of uncontested authority. And it lasted 11 years because no one had the combination. of tools and patience and proximity to take it apart, and then those things arrived in the same neighborhood at the same time, and it came apart very quickly. Structures like that always do, eventually. They have to. They're not built for load-bearing. They're built for show. The summer came back around. A year since the asphalt, a year since the August night with the machinery and the clipboard and the smell of fresh tar in the dark. My kids were a year older. My road was exactly the same. The neighborhood was better. Dana had moved on to her new case. Ray and Pam had booked the Portugal trip. Mrs. Beaumont had hung her own wind chimes, which were enormous, with deep melodic tones that carried on the evening breeze, and Ray said he could hear them from his back porch and that he considered them the sound of justice, which made me laugh every time he said it. There is a particular pleasure in being underestimated by someone who specializes in controlling others. Diane had looked at me and seen an obstacle. A stubborn homeowner with a property dispute and a road she wanted. She had not seen Dana. She had not seen the camera on the fence post. She had not seen the 47 pages building quietly on a laptop at our kitchen table. She had not seen Ray's folder or Greg Tillman or Judge Ewan, or the emails going out to 58 neighbors at 10:17 on a Tuesday morning. She had planned the night perfectly. She had not planned the morning. And that, in the end, is how it works, not just in HOA disputes, not just in neighborhood power struggles, but in every situation where someone has traded the discomfort of being accountable for the comfort of being certain. The certainty is always the weakness. It closes off the peripheral vision. It makes the planner confident and therefore less careful. It makes them fast when they should be slow, and loud when they should be quiet, and visible exactly when visibility becomes the thing that undoes them. Diane Holloway was good at what she did. That's the honest thing I can say about her. She was disciplined, organized, strategic, and patient, genuinely patient, in the way that long-term abuse of power requires patience, the willingness to build and maintain a system over years. Those are real skills. They are just skills that, in her case, were attached to a profound and ultimately fatal unwillingness to imagine that the people she had controlled might, one day, stop accepting that control. She could not imagine us because she had stopped really seeing us. We were positions in a map she had already drawn. We were obstacles to route around or levers to apply pressure to. We were not people with our own maps, our own files, our own forensic accountants and 3-year documentation projects and emergency motions filed before the courthouse opened. She had flattened us into her own narrative, and that flatness was the crack in the foundation of everything she built. My road runs along the eastern edge of my property, gravel and compacted base and a surface I am proud of. A thing I built well and maintain carefully, and it does what a road is supposed to do. It connects people from one place to another. 58 families use it, some of them every day, and most of them don't think about its history or its cost or the August night when it was briefly something else. That's fine. That's what good infrastructure does. It disappears into the background of a life that works. It only becomes visible when it's threatened. I am glad the threat is over. I am glad the road is there. I am glad my family is in this house, in this neighborhood, in this life that is ordinary and sufficient and ours. I am glad Dana is Dana and that Ray kept his files and that Judge Ewan had the precision she had and that Greg Tillman answered Claire's call. I am glad I set up the camera. I am glad I sent the email at 10:17. And I am glad, on the mornings when I have my coffee by the kitchen window and watch the light come across the property and down the length of the road, that I did not sell this house, did not give up this ground, did not let the machinery of one woman's certainty erase something I had built with intention and paid for with my own labor and my own money and my own stubborn belief that what is yours and what is right is worth fighting for. Took a year. It cost more than the road, in money, in sleep, in the particular emotional exhaustion of sustained conflict. But the morning after the asphalt night, when I sent those emails and Dana showed me the 47 pages and Claire filed the emergency motion and the world began, slowly and irreversibly, To tilt back to where it should be, I understood something I haven't forgotten. The people who lay asphalt in the dark are always counting on the dark to protect them. Bring the morning, and the asphalt doesn't hold. The morning after the asphalt went down, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Not from Diane, she was done being subtle. It was from a neighbor I barely knew, a man named Thomas Greer who lived at the far end of the subdivision and whose name I recognized from the HOA roster, but whose face I could barely place. The note said, "I know what she did. I have something you need to see. Call me." I called Thomas that afternoon. He was in his early 60s, a retired city planner, soft-spoken in the way that men who have spent decades in municipal meetings learn to be, measured, precise, someone who chose every word for what it would accomplish rather than for how it would sound. He said, "I was on the HOA board 8 years ago, for about 14 months. I resigned because of Diane." I said, "What happened?" He said, "She changed documents after votes. Minutes of meetings, resolutions, that kind of thing. I caught her doing it once and I resigned. I kept copies of everything." I drove to Thomas Greer's house that evening. He lived in one of the original homes on the street, a clean colonial with a 2-car garage and a vegetable garden that ran along the south fence with the organized precision of a man who had spent his career thinking about land use. He met me at the door with a folder. Not a manila folder like Ray's, but a proper archival binder, tabbed and labeled, with a date range on the spine, 2016 to 2017. The binder contained photocopies of original HOA meeting minutes side by side with the versions that appeared in the official records. In 5 separate instances, Thomas had documented changes, votes that had been recorded differently than they'd been cast, language altered in resolutions after the fact, one motion that appeared in his personal notes but had been completely omitted from the official minutes. He had not known what to do with it at the time, had been afraid. He said the word quietly, without apparent shame of the consequences. He had kept the binder in a filing cabinet in his home office for 8 years. I called Claire from Thomas's driveway. She picked up immediately. I described what I was holding. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Bring it to my office first thing tomorrow. And Marcus, this may change the scope of the charges." I drove home in the dark with the binder on the passenger seat, careful at every turn, like I was transporting something fragile, which in a legal sense I was. Dana reviewed the binder that night with Thomas's permission. She cross-referenced the falsified documents with the financial records she had already assembled and found 3 instances where a falsified vote corresponded directly to an HOA expenditure that had subsequently been routed through the LLC. The document falsification, in other words, was not just administrative dishonesty, it was part of the financial fraud mechanism. The falsified minutes had provided cover for payments that would otherwise have required a genuine board vote that Diane could not be certain of winning. Greg Tillman's office received the binder on Thursday morning. I was not present for that meeting. Claire went alone, but she called me afterward and said, in a tone that I had not heard from her before, something close to admiration, "Thomas kept clean copies and dated them at the time he made them. The chain of custody is perfect." She paused. "This is going to significantly complicate Diane's situation." I said, "Good." She said, "Yes." Thomas Greer, when I called to tell him what Claire had said, was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I should have done this 8 years ago." I said that maybe the timing wasn't right 8 years ago, that sometimes a case needs all its pieces before it can hold together. He said, "Maybe, but I think I was afraid, and I let that fear sit in a filing cabinet instead of giving it to someone who could use it." I didn't argue with him. He was right, and also he had given it now when it mattered, and that counted for something. The plea agreement Diane ultimately accepted, the one with the 2 felony counts and the $412,000 restitution, was shaped in part by the falsified documents Thomas had provided. The original plea offer, before the binder, had included only one felony count. After the binder, Tillman's office came back with a significantly different offer, and Diane's attorney, the quiet, careful one, apparently advised her to accept it. I did not know the details of those negotiations, but I knew the arithmetic of what happened. The binder made the difference between a manageable outcome and an overwhelming one, and Diane had chosen to manage rather than face trial. I thought about that a lot in the months afterward, the question of what would have happened if Thomas Greer had not left a note under my windshield wiper, if he had kept the binder in his filing cabinet forever, which he easily might have. If the thing that gave the case its decisive weight had simply stayed in a drawer because one tired and frightened man had concluded, 8 years ago, that the cost of fighting was too high. The margin between justice and not justice is so often a person who decides at a specific moment to stop being afraid. I was glad Thomas had made that decision. I was glad he'd put a note under my wiper. In the weeks after the plea, the HOA board, now fully reorganized under the Emergency Committee, hired an independent auditing firm to review the association's finances for the past 12 years. The audit confirmed Dana's findings and added 3 more years of irregularities she hadn't had documentation for. The total figure, in the audit's final report, was $538,000. Dana reviewed the report, looked up from it and said, "I was conservative." I said, "You always are." She said, "That's how it works." The audit report was provided to every HOA member. Ray Kowalski called me after he read it and said, with the measured restraint of a man who had been fighting this for years, "You know what the worst part is? I knew it was bad. I just didn't know it was this bad." I said, "That's how it stays hidden for so long. People know something is wrong, but without the numbers, you can't know how wrong." He said, "We should have pushed harder earlier." I said, "We push when we can see clearly enough to push. That's not failure. That's just how it went." The restitution payments Diane was required to make, $412,000 per the plea, would be paid over 5 years, with a lien on her house as security. The HOA's attorney estimated that the full audit amount, $538,000, would be the basis of a civil suit for the difference, which the board voted unanimously to file. Carl Briggs, the treasurer, had separately negotiated a plea on his own counts that included $85,000 in personal restitution and 2 years of probation. Neither of them would ever manage money that wasn't their own, in a fiduciary capacity again. Priya Nair called me in November, 6 months after everything had resolved, to tell me that she'd been thinking about what had happened and had decided to do something with the experience. She had started talking to other residents in nearby subdivisions, quietly, carefully, about HOA governance and financial transparency, and she had helped 2 other communities set up independent financial review processes modeled on what Dana had built. "I can't let this have just happened to us," she said. "It has to mean something beyond Maplewood Ridge." I told her it was exactly the right thing to do. She said, "I learned from watching you." I said, "You learned from watching yourself. That's different." Clover died in January of the following year. He was 11, which is a good age for a beagle, and he went peacefully at home on a Tuesday morning with his head in Lily's lap. We buried him in the backyard, near the garden Dana had planted the first spring we moved in. Owen built a small wooden marker with his name and 2 dates and a paw print that he carved himself with a chisel and a patience I did not know he had. Lily cried for 3 days and then announced she was ready for another dog, which is, I think, the correct response to grief when you are 9 years old. We got another beagle in March. Lily named her Justice, which she said was just a name she liked, though Dana and I exchanged a look over her head that said otherwise. Justice turned out to be faster than Clover and considerably more interested in the road, which she treated as a personal runway, and which the neighborhood kids had taken to using as an informal gathering point on warm evenings, which was, I thought, watching from the porch with a drink in my hand. Exactly what a road should be when it's working right. Ray and Pam went to Portugal in the fall and sent me a photo from Lisbon of the two of them at an outdoor cafe with coffee and pastries, looking entirely comfortable in the way that people look when they have finally given themselves permission to rest. Ray's caption said, "No HOA here. 10/10. Recommend." I printed it out and put it on the refrigerator next to Gloria Chen's card. Mrs. Beaumont's wind chimes had become a neighborhood institution by the following summer. She had acquired 3 more sets and arranged them at different heights along her porch railing, so they sounded in sequence when the wind moved through them. She called it her freedom installation without any apparent irony, and I agreed with the description completely. I ran into Thomas Greer at the grocery store one afternoon in the spring, 2 years after the asphalt night. He was in the produce section examining tomatoes with the focused attention he brought to most things. We talked for a few minutes, standing there with our carts. He said the neighborhood felt different. I asked how. He said, "Like a place where adults are in charge instead of one person pretending to be in charge." I said that was exactly right. He nodded, put 2 tomatoes in his cart, and moved on. Simple as that. The final chapter of the legal proceedings closed on a Thursday in early spring when the civil suit against Diane and Carl was settled. The HOA received $491,000 in total, the plea restitution plus a civil settlement covering the remainder. The funds were placed into a dedicated reserve account with independent oversight and a 5-member review committee elected by the full HOA membership, with rotating annual terms. Diane and Carl were barred from the property of Maplewood Ridge as a condition of the settlement. She could not go to her own neighborhood anymore. The one she had built her kingdom in. Gone. I have told this story to a few people over the years, not often, and only to people who I thought might find it useful. An engineer colleague who was dealing with a different kind of institutional power abuse. My brother, who had just moved into a new neighborhood with a HOA and was asking for advice. A woman at a school function who mentioned, somewhat obliquely, that she was having trouble with her HOA board. Each time I try to say the same thing. Document everything from the first letter because you don't know yet which detail is going to matter in the end, and the detail that matters is usually the one you didn't know was important when you wrote it down. My brother asked me when I told him the story what had been the hardest part. I thought about it. Not the legal fight, though that was exhausting. Not the night of the asphalt, though that had a specific kind of helpless fury to it that I hadn't experienced before or since. The hardest part, I told him, was the months in the middle, the period when Diane was still in power, still escalating, and the outcome was genuinely uncertain. The months when I had to get up every morning and take the next step without knowing whether the next step was going to matter. That kind of sustained uncertainty is its own form of work. It wears things down. But I also told him, those months were when I learned the most about what I was capable of. About what Dana was capable of. About what Ray had been carrying for 3 years without losing his conviction that it mattered. About Thomas Greer, who kept a binder in his filing cabinet for 8 years because some part of him knew it would be needed eventually, and who was right. The uncertainty teaches you what holds and what doesn't. I would rather not have needed the lesson, but I'm glad I have it. The road is fine. I should be clear about that because the road was the beginning of everything and it is worth ending with it. The road is fine. Gravel compacted, drainage sound, gates operational. The HOA maintains it now, under the terms of a formal easement agreement that Claire negotiated last fall. They cover maintenance costs, I retain ownership, and the easement runs with the property and cannot be revoked without a court order. It is, Claire told me, among the cleanest easement agreements she has seen. Which is to say, it is bulletproof. I wanted bulletproof. In June of that second summer, a family moved into the house at the far end of the street. A couple with 3 kids, a minivan, a very loud golden retriever, and absolutely no knowledge of the past 2 years of Maplewood Ridge history. They were just a family who had found a good school district and a neighborhood that seemed, to their new eyes, quiet and well-maintained and welcoming, which now it was. The past was not visible in the surface of things anymore. It had been repaired and painted over, not with dishonesty but with time, the way neighborhoods always absorb their own histories. Their oldest kid, a girl about Lily's age, started using my road on her bike within the first week. I watched her go past the window one afternoon, fast, confident, taking the corner wide the way kids do, and I thought, she has no idea. She has no idea what it costs to keep this path clear. And that's exactly right. That's what it's supposed to feel like. A road that doesn't call attention to itself. A road that just works. A neighborhood where the kids can ride their bikes and the wind chimes can ring and the flagpoles can go up and the people who live here can live here without needing to fight for every ordinary thing. That is what we were fighting for. Not the $180,000. Not the legal principle, though that mattered. Not even the vindication, though I will not pretend that didn't matter too. We were fighting for the ordinary. For the unremarkable right to live in a place without someone else's thumb on the scale. For a neighborhood that serves the people in it rather than the other way around. For mornings where you can have your coffee and watch the light come across the property and not feel the low-grade dread of whatever the next letter might say. We have those mornings now. Most mornings. The coffee is good and the light is good and Justice the Beagle takes her job on the road as seriously as Clover ever did. And Lily is getting very good at soccer and Owen has nearly finished the telescope and Dana is on her third new case since all of this and I have a retaining wall project in the back that is going very well. Ordinary. Sufficient. Ours. I still check my camera footage every morning. Old habit from the months when checking it was necessary. I will probably stop eventually. But for now I like the confirmation, the quiet images from overnight, the road empty and undisturbed in the dark, the gravel silver in the infrared light, everything exactly where it's supposed to be. No asphalt trucks, no clipboards, no one else's certainty laying itself down over what I built. Just the road, just the morning, just the life we came here to have, still standing, still ours. There is one more thing I haven't mentioned, and I want to mention it because it is the part of the story that surprised me most. Not the fraud, not the contempt ruling, not even Thomas Greer's binder, but something smaller and quieter that happened about 3 months after the plea agreement was finalized. I got a letter from Diane Holloway, not through an attorney, personal stationery, her handwriting, a single page. She wrote that she understood I had no reason to read further and that she would not blame me if I didn't. She wrote that she was not writing to ask for anything. She wrote that she wanted me to know she understood now that what she had done was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but wrong in a way she couldn't fully explain and wasn't sure she deserved to, given what she had put our family and the neighborhood through. She did not excuse herself. She did not claim she had been under pressure or acting in what she believed was the HOA's best interest. She simply said, "I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway, and I told myself the right justifications for long enough that I stopped hearing them as justifications." She said she hoped the neighborhood was better. She said she was sorry. And then she signed her name. I sat with the letter for a long time. I read it twice. I showed it to Dana, who read it once, set it down, and said, "What do you want to do with it?" I said I didn't know yet. She said, "You don't have to do anything with it." I said, "I know." I put it in the folder with everything else. Not as evidence, not as documentation, just as part of the record of what happened here, all of it, including the end, including the admission that came when the certainty was gone and there was nothing left to protect. I did not write back. I thought about it. I decided that the letter had said what it needed to say and that a response from me was not part of what was owed. She had said she wasn't asking for anything.
I took her word.
What I chose to do with the letter, to keep it, to acknowledge it privately, to let it be part of the full story rather than discard it, felt like the right kind of response. The kind that doesn't require a reply. Dana asked me some weeks later if I had made peace with it. I said I thought so. She said, "Even the road part?" I said, "Especially the road part. The road is fine." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind she has when something is actually funny to her and not just socially appropriate to laugh at. I liked hearing it. I always do. I have driven past Diane's house a handful of times since the plea. She is still there, as far as I know. The house is the same, the yard is kept up. There is sometimes a car in the driveway that I don't know. She is living her life, smaller and more constrained than before, with the weight of what she did and what it cost settling around her in whatever form that takes for a person like her. I don't know what that looks like from the inside. I don't know that I need to. They do. We do. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is, in fact, exactly what we came here for. I walked the road again last week. Dusk like the first time. Justice trotted ahead of me, nose to the gravel, profoundly interested in everything she found there. The light came through the trees at the low angle of late afternoon, and the neighborhood was making the particular ambient noise that suburbs make at that hour. Kids somewhere, a lawnmower in the distance, music from a backyard a few streets over. The road stretched ahead of me, clean and straight and level, exactly as I had built it to be, and I walked it from one end to the other and then stood at the far end for a moment before turning back. It occurred to me, standing there, that I had never once in 6 years taken a single step on this road without being conscious of what it had cost me to keep it. Every commute, every shortcut, every morning Dana backed out of the driveway and used it to get to the highway. I was always somewhere underneath the ordinary, aware of the fight it had taken to preserve that ordinary. Maybe that consciousness fades over time. Maybe eventually I will walk this road the way the new girl next door rides her bike on it. Without history, without weight, just a path from here to there. But maybe not. Maybe some things you carry forward, not as burdens but as context. The knowledge that the ordinary was worth fighting for, that the infrastructure of a decent life requires someone, somewhere, to build it and defend it and refuse to let it be taken in the night by someone with a clipboard and a crew of 12 and the absolute certainty that no one would be watching. Someone was watching. I was watching. And the morning came, as mornings do, and the asphalt didn't hold. That is the whole story, or as much of it as a story can contain, which is to say, most of the facts and some of the truth and the part of the feeling that can be put into words without losing what it actually felt like to live through it. The rest lives in the places stories can't reach. In Dana's face when she turned the laptop toward me that morning, in Ray's voice when he said, "Neither are we," in Thomas Greer's filing cabinet, in Gloria Chen's handwriting on a card that is still on my refrigerator between Lily's drawing and Owen's ribbon. It lives in the road, in the gravel and the drainage and the easement agreement that is as close to bulletproof as my attorney can make it. In the morning light that comes across the property at the angle I have memorized over 6 years of mornings, making the ordinary look, for a moment, golden. I'll take that. I will absolutely take that. The new HOA board held its first full annual meeting in the spring, and the attendance was remarkable. Nearly 60% of the subdivision's households sent at least one representative, which the board's new secretary, a meticulous young woman named Helen Park who had moved in the previous fall, told me was the highest in the association's 22-year history. I sat in the back row with Ray and Priya and watched proceedings that were, by any standard, entirely ordinary. Budget review, maintenance schedule, community event proposals. Ordinary and wonderful. 3 items on the agenda had been proposed by residents via the new online submission system the board had set up. A first for Maplewood Ridge, where previously the agenda had been set entirely by Diane's discretion. One proposal was to establish a community garden on a strip of common land near the clubhouse. One was to improve lighting on the main walking path. One was to form a welcome committee for new residents. All 3 passed unanimously. I voted yes on all 3. Helen Park read the financial report in full, every line item, every vendor contract, every reserve balance, and fielded questions from the floor with the patient competence of someone who genuinely enjoyed the work. When she finished, an older man 2 rows in front of me said, loudly, "That's the first time in 10 years I've understood where my dues money was going." The room laughed. Helen smiled. I thought about Dana's 47 pages and what they had made possible. Afterward, in the parking lot, Ray caught up to me and said, "This is what it's supposed to feel like." I asked what specifically. He said, "A neighborhood meeting where you leave feeling better than when you came in." I said I agreed. He said, "Took us a while." I said, "Took us exactly as long as it needed to." He made a face that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced but was willing to accept it. That face is very Ray. I drove home on my road. Both directions, technically. I went the long way around just to come back on it from the south entrance, which I sometimes do on evenings when I want the specific visual of the road unrolling ahead of me in my headlights, clean and mine and there. Justice was at the window when I pulled in, her tail going at the particular velocity she reserves for my return from anywhere, which is one of the most reliably good things in my life. Dana was in the kitchen reading something when I came in. She asked how the meeting went. I said, "Really good." She asked if people were engaged. I said, "Packed house." Helen Park read every line of the financial report. An old guy said it was the first time in 10 years he understood where his dues money went. Dana set down her book and said, "Good." Not surprised, just satisfied, like a number that had finally come out right. I poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from her at the table, and we talked for a while about nothing in particular. The kids, a show we were watching, a weekend trip we'd been vaguely planning for months that we should probably actually plan. Normal life. The life that had always been the point. At some point Dana said, without apparent transition, "I heard from Claire today. The civil suit settled." I said, "I know, she texted me." Dana said, $491,000. I said, "Yeah." She said, "I was conservative." I said, "You always are." She smiled. The same smile. The one I was thinking of earlier. I am always glad to see it. I have a photograph on my desk, in my home office where I do the freelance engineering work that supplements my main job. The photograph is of the road, taken on the day the restoration was completed, in the October light that was golden and clear. The gravel is fresh and even, the drainage grates are clean, the sight lines are open. It is not a dramatic photograph. It looks like what it is. A well-built private road in decent repair on a sunny day. But I look at it sometimes when I am working, and it reminds me of what careful work looks like and why it matters and what it can hold against. My father was a construction foreman. He built things his whole working life, commercial buildings, bridges, a section of interstate highway in our home state that I drove on once and pointed out to Owen, who was not as impressed as I had hoped. My father used to say that the most important moment in any construction project was the moment you decided what you were building for. Not what you were building, but what you were building for. The purpose, the use, the people it would serve. I built the road for the people who would use it. That was, in the end, what made it worth defending. Not because it was mine, though it was, and not because the principle mattered, though it did, but because it served people and the person trying to take it was not trying to serve anyone. She was trying to control something, which is the opposite of service, and I think my father would have had a very clear and very undiplomatic opinion about that distinction. He died before we moved to Maplewood Ridge. I think about him when I walk the road sometimes. I think he would have approved of the way it drains. Owen's telescope is almost finished. It's a 6-inch Newtonian reflector, and he has been grinding the mirror himself with a patience and precision that is, I say this as an engineer, genuinely impressive for an 11-year-old. Or 12 now. He had a birthday in April and requested a book about variable stars and a trip to the observatory 2 towns over, both of which were arranged. He is becoming, gradually, the kind of person who makes careful things. I am trying not to make too much of this as a father, but I am making a great deal of it privately. Lily scored 3 goals in the spring soccer tournament final. Her team won, 4-2. I was on the sideline, and I am not a person who screams at youth soccer games, I want to be clear about that, but I may have briefly been somewhat loud. Dana was loud too, which she will tell you was an aberration and which I will tell you is completely consistent with who she is when something matters to her, which is nearly everything. A good year. A good second year. The ordinary had settled back in, soft and unremarkable and exactly right, and the things I had been afraid of losing, the house, the road, the school district, the neighborhood, the mornings, were all still there, still intact, still ours. The fear that sustained conflict creates is its own kind of erosion, slow and almost invisible until something ends and you realize how much lighter you are without it. We were lighter, measurably lighter. I have been asked a few times whether I would do it all again. Fight the way we fought, spend what we spent, endure what we endured, if I had known in advance how long it would take and how hard it would be. The honest answer is that I would, and that it's not actually a difficult question for me, which surprises the people who ask it. But the alternative was not keep the road and avoid the fight. The alternative was lose the road and live in a neighborhood where Diane Holloway had proven she could take what she wanted without consequence. That alternative was worse. Worse not just for us, but for every family in Maplewood Ridge who would have continued to live under a system that had proven it could act with impunity at 2 in the morning. Some fights are worth it not just for what you personally get back, but for what gets dismantled in the process. Not all of them. I am not a person who seeks conflict or believes that confrontation is inherently productive. But this one needed to happen, and we were positioned to make it happen, and we did. I am at peace with the cost. One more thing. I went back to the county HOA oversight office, about a year after the resolution, and spoke with the same woman I had called when I filed the original complaint, the one who had told me 90 days. She remembered my case. She said, I want you to know, your case is why we updated our response timeline protocols. 90 days is too long. We're down to 30 now for active complaints. I said that was good. She said, it's not perfect, but it's better. I said, better is enough to work with. She said, yes, it is. Better is enough to work with. I keep coming back to that phrase. It is the most accurate description I have found for how things are now. Not perfect, not fully healed, not free of the memory of what happened, but better. Better than it was. Better than it would have stayed. Better in the way that a neighborhood can be when the people in it decide that ordinary fairness is worth organizing around, worth attending meetings for, worth filing complaints about, worth keeping records of, worth being, when necessary, loud about. Better is enough. It is, in fact, quite a lot. The road is there. The morning comes. Justice runs ahead of me on the gravel, and the light is low and golden, and somewhere in the middle distance a kid is riding a bike on a path she didn't have to fight for, and that is the right ending to this story. Not the courtroom, not the plea, not the contempt ruling or the asphalt removal or the 47 pages. The right ending is the ordinary day, the one we fought to get back to, the one we're living in now. I am glad to be in it. I am glad we stayed. I am glad the road holds. There is a quality to late summer evenings in a good suburb that I have never been able to fully describe. The particular light, the sound of sprinklers and distant traffic and kids being called in for dinner, the smell of someone's grill 2 streets over, the way the day releases its heat slowly into a dusk that seems reluctant to end. Maplewood Ridge has that quality, has always had it. It was never what was broken here. What was broken was underneath it, in the governance, in the ledgers, in the imbalance of power that one person had spent 11 years constructing with care and patience and a complete disregard for the people it was crushing. What we did was not heroic. I want to be clear about that. We were homeowners with resources and determination and a forensic accountant in the family, and we fought a fight that many people fight without those advantages and lose, and the fact that we didn't lose is not solely a product of what we did right but also of what we had access to. I am aware of that. It sits with me in a way that isn't guilt exactly but is something close to it, a recognition that the outcome was partly a function of luck and circumstances that are not universally distributed. What I hope, having gone through it, is that the story is useful. That someone else in a different Maplewood Ridge, reading about cameras on fence posts and forensic accountants and 3-year documentation projects and emergency motions filed at 8 a.m. and neighbors who kept binders and filing cabinets, sees something they can use. Not a blueprint. Every situation is different, every power structure has different weaknesses, but an argument for staying in it, for documenting relentlessly, for finding the people adjacent to the conflict who have their own pieces of the picture, for understanding that the person who seems to have all the power usually has it because no one has yet assembled the specific combination of tools and patience and stubbornness required to show that the power was never as solid as it looked. It never is. That is maybe the most important thing. It never is. Dana read this, what I wrote, trying to get the story straight, and said, "You left out the part where you burned the pancakes the morning of the contempt hearing." I said I didn't think that was relevant. She said, "It's very you." I said, "Fine. It's true. I burned the pancakes the morning of the contempt hearing because I was distracted and because the pan was too hot and because Owen had knocked Lily's backpack into the hallway and they were arguing about it in the way siblings argue before school. Normal chaos. Normal morning. With a contempt hearing at the end of it. That is, I think, the most accurate image of what this period of our lives was like. Burned pancakes and a contempt hearing and kids arguing in the hallway. All happening at the same time, all real, all ours. We made it through. Of course we made it through. That's how these stories end, the ones worth telling. Not with triumph exactly, but with the quiet recognition that you are still standing, still in your house, still having breakfast, still taking the next step. The machinery in the dark was real. The clipboard was real. The asphalt was real. And the morning came anyway, and the road was still underneath it, and we were still here, and that was enough. More than enough. Always more than enough. The END. Author's note. Paragraphs 176 to 300 are continuations and expansions of the story's thematic resolution, community restoration, and character reflections. The core narrative concludes at paragraph 175. The following paragraphs deepen the world and its aftermath. 6 months after the plea agreement, the Maplewood Ridge HOA published its first-ever annual transparency report, 12 pages, printed on good paper, mailed to every household. It covered every dollar spent, every contract awarded, every vote taken, every fine issued, and the outcome of any appeal. Helen Park had written the whole thing herself in her spare time. She called it What Governance is Supposed to Look Like. I framed the cover page. I'm not embarrassed about that. The report became something of a model. Priya had been sharing HOA governance materials with contacts in 3 other nearby subdivisions, and 2 of them adopted versions of Helen's transparency report format within the following year. Dana was consulted by one of them for help structuring the financial disclosure section. She did it on a Saturday morning, billed nothing, and said it was the best use of a Saturday she'd had in months. That's Dana. Ray Kowalski's flagpole was formally approved and installed in September, 3 years after he had first applied for permission. It was a 20-foot aluminum pole with a cleated rope and a proper finial, and he flew the flag at full staff on the day it went up and then at half staff for the next week because a veteran he had known from his service had died. And nobody said a word about it, and nobody was going to, and that quiet, unremarkable fact, that a man could fly his flag however he needed to without accounting to anyone for it, was its own kind of victory. Gloria Chun sent me a second card at Christmas. This one with a small photo of her front porch with the wind chimes visible in the background. She wrote, "They sound like freedom, which is a cliché, but clichés become clichés because they're true." I put the card with the first one on the refrigerator in the growing collection of small records of what this cost and what it meant and what it gave back. Owen finished the telescope in November, and we set it up in the backyard on a clear night with a star map he had printed and laminated himself. He found Saturn on the first try. The rings were visible, pale gold and tilted, hanging there in the dark with the same patient permanence they have had for billions of years regardless of what was happening in our subdivision. Owen said, "Dad, look." I looked for a long time. Saturn, in a telescope my son built with his own hands, on a clear November night, in the backyard of the house we had fought to stay in. Some moments are complete. That was one of them. Justice the Beagle turned one in March and showed no signs of becoming less interested in the road, which she treated as a kind of daily audit. Nose down, moving at speed, checking everything against some internal standard I could not access. She was very thorough. Lily declared her the best dog we had ever had, which I consider a reasonable assessment given the evidence, and which Owen disputed with the loyal grief of a boy who remembered Clover, which is also a reasonable position. Dana was promoted in the spring, a title change that came with a larger caseload and a team of 2 junior analysts, which she managed with the same focused economy she brought to everything. She did not change. The work got bigger and she stayed the same size in relation to it, which is the truest definition of competence I know. I told her she deserved it. She said, "Of course I do." She is not a person who performs false modesty. I love that about her. I took on a larger engineering project in the fall. A drainage redesign for a small commercial park in the next town over, the biggest independent contract I had managed in years. I worked on it in the evenings and on weekends and finished it 2 weeks ahead of schedule, which surprised even me. I think the previous 2 years had compressed something in me, some reserve of focus that had been spent on the legal fight, and with that fight over, the focus had nowhere to go except into the work. The work was better for it. Claire Oduya won an award from the State Bar Association that winter, the one they give to attorneys who have done distinguished work in property rights litigation. She mentioned, in her acceptance remarks, a case involving a private road in a suburban HOA and the forensic accounting that provided the case's decisive weight. She did not use our names. She did not need to. We knew. Ray called me after seeing it reported in the local legal journal and said, "We're in a bar award." I said, "We are, apparently." He said, "I'm going to tell Pam." I said, "You should absolutely tell Pam." The community garden went in the following spring, on the strip of common land near the clubhouse. 9 families had signed up to 10 plots, including, this detail delighted me, Thomas Greer, who turned out to have very definite opinions about soil composition, and who planted heirloom tomatoes of a type I had not known existed before he explained them to me at length one afternoon when I stopped to see how it was going. The garden was productive and social and slightly chaotic and entirely good. The welcome committee visited the new family with the minivan and the golden retriever in July. Priya organized the basket, homemade cookies, a neighborhood directory, a copy of the current HOA guidelines, and a handwritten card that said, "Welcome to Maplewood Ridge. You're going to like it here." The family was, by all accounts, delighted. Their oldest daughter, the one who rode her bike on my road, had already made friends with Lily, which I knew because Lily mentioned it approximately every day. I saw the father of that family at the mailbox one morning in late July. He was a tallish man, friendly, with the slightly overwhelmed look of someone who has just settled into a new house and is still mapping the terrain. He said the neighborhood seemed great. I said it was. He said, the HOA seemed really organized and transparent. We got a full copy of the annual report before we even moved in. Our last neighborhood HOA was a nightmare. I said, yeah. He said, total nightmare. Power-tripping president, mysterious finances, the works. I said, that sounds familiar. He laughed. I did not correct his assumption that I was speaking abstractly. The walking path lighting improvement was installed in August, funded out of the restored reserve account. 8 new LED fixtures, positioned to illuminate the full quarter-mile loop without creating light pollution into adjacent yards. The lighting subcommittee, 3 volunteers who had spent 2 months picking exactly the right fixtures, was very proud of them, and they were right to be. On the first evening after installation, about 15 residents turned up to walk the lit path, more or less spontaneously, which I think constitutes the most organic community event Maplewood Ridge had seen in years. I walked it too with Dana and Justice in the new light. The path looked good. The neighborhood looked good. The people on the path were talking to each other, introducing themselves, commenting on the lighting, being neighbors in the uncomplicated way that neighbors can be when the governance they live under is functional and fair and not designed to serve one person's preferences. It was a Tuesday evening in August. It was about as ordinary as a thing can be. I was grateful for every second of it. In September, Lily started 6th grade. Owen started 7th. They were both, in the way of children who have grown up in a place, entirely unconscious of the neighborhood's history. They knew there had been some kind of problem with the HOA lady, which was how they referred to the entirety of the past 2 years, and they knew it had been resolved, and beyond that they were interested only in school and friends and sports and telescopes and the dog. Which is, I want to be very clear, exactly right. Children should not have to carry the weight of adult conflicts. I was glad they had been sheltered from the worst of it. The September HOA meeting was attended by 44 residents, still high by historical standards, though lower than the spring meeting's record. Ray said this was actually a good sign. People show up in force when they're angry or scared. Moderate engagement means they trust the process. I thought that was one of the smarter things I had heard him say, which is a high bar because Ray is consistently smart. Diane Holloway's house sold in October. I saw the for sale sign go up one morning and the sold sign appear about 3 weeks later. I don't know where she went. I don't know who bought it. The new owners, whoever they are, moved in on a Thursday with a moving truck and a cat carrier and showed no particular interest in HOA governance or private road easements, which seems like exactly the right starting point. I hope they like it here. I think they will. The first year of the new board ended with the HOA in the best financial position it had been in since its founding. Reserves fully funded, budget in surplus, all vendor contracts competitively bid and transparently documented. Helen Park presented the year-end financials at the November meeting with the same thoroughness she brought to everything, and when she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then someone started clapping, and then everyone did, and Helen looked surprised and pleased and slightly embarrassed, which was very appropriate given that she had just presented a financial report that people were applauding, which is not something that happens in most places but which was, under the circumstances, entirely warranted. I went home that night and sat on the front porch for a while, in the November cold, with a jacket on and a drink in my hand. The neighborhood was quiet. The new LED path lighting was visible in the distance, a warm glow at the end of the street. Justice sat at my feet and monitored the driveway with her usual professional attention. The road was there, at the edge of the property, dark and still and exactly where I had built it. 2 years. From the first letter to the final financial report. From the asphalt night to the November meeting where people applauded a budget presentation. From Diane's clipboard to Helen Park's 12-page transparency report. From the camera on the fence post to Owen finding Saturn in a telescope he built himself. From the panic of being seen as an obstacle to the quiet satisfaction of being, along with a lot of other people, part of something that had become genuinely good. I thought about what I would tell my younger self, if I could, the version of me that moved to Maplewood Ridge 6 years ago with a family and a plan and no particular anticipation of what was coming. I don't know that I would tell him anything, actually. The warning would change the path, and the path, as difficult as it was, led to here, to this porch, this neighborhood, this outcome. Some things have to be lived rather than anticipated. Some knowledge can only be earned, not given. But if I had to say one thing, I think it would be this: the people who need to control everything are always most vulnerable to the things they aren't watching. Watch everything. Document everything. Build things well and build them to last. And when someone tries to take what you've built in the dark at 2 in the morning, with a crew of 12 and a clipboard and the certainty that no one is paying attention, be paying attention. Set up the camera. Make the calls. Send the emails. Stay in the fight. The morning always comes. And the asphalt never holds as well as a road that was built with care, for the people who need to use it by someone who intended it to last. I am still that person. I am still here. The road is still mine. And the morning, as it always does, has come. The second winter after everything settled was quieter than the first. Not the anxious quiet of a conflict in suspension, but the actual quiet of a neighborhood that had found its level, the hum of ordinary life doing ordinary things without the low-grade interference of someone's thumb on the scale. I noticed it most at night, lying awake in the particular way I do at 2 or 3 in the morning, when I would realize I was not listening for anything. The absence of vigilance, after 2 years of it, felt strange at first and then, gradually, then completely, felt like rest. Dana noticed it too, though she named it differently. She said one morning over coffee, without preamble, "I haven't checked the HOA email in 3 weeks. I asked if she felt guilty about that. She said, "No, I feel like we're done." Not done as in finished with something we had failed to resolve, but done as in a job completed, a case closed, the kind of done that a forensic accountant feels when the numbers have finally told their whole story and there's nothing left to trace. The HOA email, which had once delivered letters with Diane's signature and red HOA seal stamps and escalating fines and meeting notices for votes that had been pre-decided, now delivered in any given month, a maintenance schedule reminder, a community event announcement, and occasionally a note from Helen about something routine. Budget item approved. Contractor engaged. Path lighting serviced. The administrative texture of a community running itself without drama. I read those emails with a pleasure that was out of proportion to their content and entirely proportionate to what they represented. In January of the second winter, I received a call from a journalist, not a local reporter, but someone from a regional magazine that covered suburban living and, apparently, HOA governance issues, which she described as a growing beat. She had heard about the Maplewood Ridge case through the county's HOA oversight office. The updated protocols, she said, had drawn attention, and she wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak on the record. I said I'd think about it. I called Claire. Claire said it was my call. I called Dana. Dana said, "Only if you can tell it accurately without making it sound like a crusade." It wasn't a crusade. It was a property dispute that turned into a fraud case. That is the most accurate single sentence about the whole affair I have ever heard. I called the journalist back and said yes with that framing. The article ran in March. It was careful and accurate and focused, as I had requested, on the systemic issues rather than the personalities. Diane was not named. The journalist and her editor made that call, citing the ongoing probation and the fact that the plea had not required public identification, but the structural failure of HOA governance, the gaps in state oversight, and the way that unchecked authority in small community organizations can corrode into something genuinely harmful were all covered with the clarity and specificity the topic deserved. I read it twice. I thought it was the right piece. The comment section under the online version of the article, which I was advised not to read and which I absolutely read, contained, among the usual noise, several hundred comments from people across the region who had their own HOA stories. Some of them were less serious than mine. Some of them were considerably more serious. All of them had the quality of people who had been carrying something and suddenly found a place to set it down. I read through as many as I could before Dana came and stood behind me and said, "That's enough of that," and closed the laptop. She was right. It was enough. The article had done its work. The comments were their own territory. The magazine piece generated a call from a state legislator's office. A staff member, young, energetic, with the particular focused energy of someone working in policy on an issue they believe in, asked if I would be willing to speak to a legislative subcommittee studying HOA governance reform in our state. I said yes. Claire came with me. Dana prepared 3 pages of notes that I was not allowed to read verbatim but which I was very glad to have. Ray wanted to come. I told him there wasn't room on the panel but that he should submit written comments, which he did, 6 pages, single-spaced, drawing on 3 years of documentation, meticulous and devastating and completely Ray. The subcommittee hearing was in April, in a conference room at the state capitol that smelled like institutional carpet and 40 years of meetings. I testified for 20 minutes. I told the story factually, without drama, with the dates and the dollar amounts and the procedural failures and the 90-day response time. The subcommittee chair, a woman from a district with a lot of HOA communities who had, I gathered, heard variations of this story before, asked 3 questions that demonstrated she understood exactly what the systemic problem was. I answered them as clearly as I could. Claire answered 2 follow-up questions from other members with the precision that makes her good at her job. Then it was done. I don't know what legislation, if any, ultimately resulted from that hearing. Policy moves slowly and outcomes are rarely traceable to single moments of testimony. But I know the subcommittee chair asked for Dana's financial analysis methodology to be formally submitted as part of the committee record. And I know the staff member called me afterward and said, "This was exactly what we needed." And I know that Ray's 6-page written comments were cited in a draft bill circulated for comment the following fall. Whether the bill passed, I cannot tell you. But it was there. The record existed. The next person who found themselves in a version of this situation would have a few more resources than I had, because we had made the record. That is, in the end, the thing I am most proud of, not winning the property dispute, not the contempt ruling, not even the fraud conviction. The record. The documentation that Dana built and that Thomas carried for 8 years and that Ray assembled over 3 and that Claire organized and that Greg Tillman used and that the subcommittee chair entered into the official proceedings of state government. A record is what makes an individual experience into something with reach beyond the individual. A record is how one family's fight with one HOA president becomes, if you are patient and careful and willing to share it, part of the infrastructure that the next family can build from. I think about that more than I think about the road, honestly. The road is physical and mine. The record is something else. It belongs to the situation, to the pattern it documents, to the people who will face similar situations and need to know that facing them is possible. And that they are not alone and that the right combination of patience and documentation and stubbornness and good people can, with enough time and some luck, make things right. Or righter, better. Enough to work with. I keep coming back to that phrase. On a warm evening in May of the 2nd year, Dana and I sat on the front porch with wine, while the kids were at activities and Justice monitored the yard with her characteristic dedication. The neighborhood was doing its evening thing, the sprinklers, the distant traffic, the grill smell, the kids being called in. Dana said, after a comfortable silence, "Do you ever wish we had just moved?" I said, "No." She said, "Really?" I said, Do you? She thought about it. She said, no. But I wanted to make sure you didn't. I said, why? She said, because you're the one who had to stand on the road in the dark at 2 a.m. I said, you're the one who stayed up building 47 pages. She said, that was inside. That was different. I said, it wasn't. We sat with that for a while. The evening did its thing around us. Justice found something of interest near the fence post and examined it at length. Whatever it was apparently failed to meet her standards, because she returned to the porch shortly afterward with the expression of a dog who has investigated and reached conclusions. I don't know what would have happened if we had moved. Maybe nothing. Maybe the fraud would have continued undiscovered for another decade, and some other family would eventually have found it, or maybe not. Maybe Diane would have kept running the fiefdom until she died or retired, and Maplewood Ridge would have remained a place where the ordinary was taxed and the residents paid the toll without knowing the toll was unnecessary. I can't know that. I only know what happened, which is that we stayed, and the things we each brought to the fight turned out to be exactly the things the fight required. There is probably a lesson there about fitting the tools to the problem, or about community as the sum of the individuals who decide to engage with it, or about the specific importance of forensic accountants when your neighbor is committing financial crimes. Take whichever lesson seems most useful. They're all accurate. The third spring brought crabapple trees to the common area at the end of my road. 3 of them, planted by a volunteer crew one Saturday morning. Mrs. Beaumont organized the planting. Thomas Greer brought the trees, which he had sourced from a nursery he trusted. Ray dug the holes, which took longer than expected because the soil in that corner was harder than it looked. Priya made coffee and brought it in thermoses. Helen documented everything for the HOA records because that is Helen. I helped dig the second hole. We all worked together on a Saturday morning in the spring, in the ordinary and slightly chaotic way that community work gets done. Too many opinions about depth, disagreement about spacing, someone's shovel handle coming loose at an inconvenient moment. The trees went in by noon. By the following spring they would bloom, white and pink, at the entrance to the road, and you would not need to know the history to appreciate them, though knowing the history would make them more beautiful. I know the history. I appreciate them accordingly. Dana made a joke on the drive back from Ray and Pam's house one evening that fall that she should have charged consulting fees for the financial analysis. I said, how much? She did the math, her billing rate, the hours, the complexity, and named a number that made me laugh. I said, you would have paid more than that in property value if we'd let Diane win. Dana said, obviously. That's why I did it for free. I said, you did it because you found $412,000 in fraud and couldn't not do something about it. She said, that too. I said, mostly that. She said, mostly that. Carl Briggs, the treasurer, Diane's co-conspirator, apparently moved out of state after his plea. No one in Maplewood Ridge had seen him since. His house sold to a young couple who were, from what I could observe, entirely normal and uninvolved in anything. They had a very nice truck and a small herb garden in the front, which the new HOA approved without comment, as herb gardens should be approved without comment. I finished the back slope retaining wall in November of the second year and stood back to look at it with the professional satisfaction of a job done right. 16 courses of block, proper drainage behind the face, compacted aggregate backfill, a capstone course that came out level to within 1/8 of an inch over the full 40-foot run. My father would have looked at it and found something to critique. He always did, but he would have nodded. I could see him nodding. That was enough. The winter of the second year was mild. We had the kind of December that makes you feel briefly grateful for climate change before you remember that you shouldn't. The crabapple trees were bare but present at the road entrance. 3 neat forms against a pale gray sky, full of the intention of the bloom that would come in April. I drove past them every morning. I liked them more every time. Christmas that year was large and loud. My sister came with her family, and Dana's mother flew in from Ohio, and we filled the house in the way that holiday houses are meant to be filled, with too many people and not enough counter space and children who were up too late and adults who were perfectly happy to let them stay up because there was nowhere to be in the morning. Owen showed his grandmother the telescope. She looked through it at the moon and said it was the most incredible thing she had ever seen, which was, given that she is a woman who has seen quite a lot, a generous response and which Owen received with appropriate pride. Lily gave everyone handmade cards. Mine said, "You are the best dad because you never gave up." She drew a road on it, surprisingly accurately for a 12-year-old. I put it on the refrigerator, and it stayed there the rest of the winter, next to Gloria Chen's card and Ray's Portugal photo and Owen's science fair ribbon and the growing collection of small evidence that this life in this house on this street was the right place to be. In January, exactly 2 years and 5 months after the asphalt night, I walked the road at dawn. The morning was cold and still, the sky a deep dark blue thinning to gray at the horizon, and my breath made small clouds. Justice ran ahead, delighted with the cold and the early hour and the smells that overnight had arranged themselves on the gravel for her particular attention. I walked the full length from the south entrance to the north gate, and then stood at the gate for a moment looking back. From the north gate you can see the whole length of it, the compacted gravel, the drainage grates, the gentle slope that carries water off the surface and into the swale I engineered along the east side, the crabapple trees at the far end just visible in the pre-dawn light, still bare, waiting. A road I built, a road I paid for, a road I stood on in the dark at 2 in the morning while someone tried to take it and held on to and held on to and held on to. Justice looked back at me from the far end, wondering what I was waiting for. I was not waiting for anything. I was just looking, taking the specific kind of inventory that you take when you have had to fight for something and then kept it and want to remember clearly and exactly what you were fighting for. This specific length of gravel and drainage and slope. This ordinary road. This unremarkable, well-built, absolutely worth it piece of private property doing exactly what it was built to do. I took a breath of cold January air and started walking back toward the house. Justice fell in beside me, done with the road's morning inventory, satisfied with her findings. The sky was lightening, blue to gray to the particular flat white of a winter morning that will not quite manage clouds or sun but settles into a brightness that is its own kind of clear. Dana had coffee waiting when I came in. She handed me a mug without asking. That's how we are in the mornings. There is a shorthand, built over 15 years, that makes words mostly unnecessary for the first 20 minutes of the day. I hung up Justice's leash and sat down at the table and put both hands around the mug and let the warmth move through me. We didn't talk about the road. We didn't talk about Diane or the plea or the contempt ruling or the asphalt or any of it. We talked about what Owen wanted for his birthday, which was coming up in April, and whether we should book the beach house we rented last summer for this summer too, and whether Dana's mother might want to come back in the spring. Ordinary things. The whole weight of what we had been through compressed into the comfortable ordinariness of a morning conversation in a kitchen in a house we had chosen to stay in and had fought to keep and were still, every morning, glad to be in. This is what it's for. All of it, the documentation, the camera, the 47 pages, the court dates, the emergency motions, the emails at 10:17 a.m., the 3-year files and the 8-year binders and the forensic accounting and the testimony and the record entered into state legislative proceedings. All of it for this, a January morning with hot coffee and a conversation about beach houses and a road outside that is doing exactly what a road is supposed to do. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds small. I want to be honest about the fact that I know it sounds small and say clearly that it is not. The ordinary is not small. The ordinary is what a good life is made of, and the right to live it, to wake up in a house you chose, in a neighborhood you've built relationships in, with a road you paid for doing what you built it to do without someone else's thumb on the scale, is not a small right. It is the whole point. Diane Holloway spent 11 years teaching Maplewood Ridge that the ordinary was her to distribute or withhold. She was wrong about that. The ordinary belongs to the people who live in it. And when someone tries to take that from you, the right response is to document everything. Find your people, file your motions, build your record, and stay in the fight until the morning comes. Because the morning always comes. And here we are in it. Right here. This is the morning. The crabapple trees bloomed in April, exactly as Thomas had predicted, white and pink against the April sky, at the entrance to my road. I drove past them on a Tuesday morning on my way to a site visit and had to stop the car for a moment, because sometimes a thing is more beautiful than you were prepared for, even when you knew it was coming. 3 trees blooming at the end of a road that is mine, at the entrance to a neighborhood that is ours, in the morning light of a year that was better than the last. Owen turned 12 in April with a party that involved the telescope, a star map he had printed and laminated, and 7 friends who were, by his report, delivered with the certainty of someone who has done extensive research, really into astronomy now. Whether this assessment was accurate or optimistic I cannot say, but I can say that 8 12-year-olds looking through a homemade telescope at Saturn on a clear April night in a backyard in the suburbs is one of the best things I have ever seen. Lily won her soccer tournament in May. I was loud again. I have accepted this about myself. Dana started running in the mornings, which is something she had been saying she would do for 3 years. She runs 2 miles 5 days a week, and she comes back with the particular focused energy of someone who has solved a problem and is ready to solve more problems. I am supportive of this. I am also slightly jealous of the focused energy, but that is a separate issue. Ray and Pam went to Italy in June. He sent a photo from Rome of him and Pam at a cafe, looking even more relaxed than the Portugal photo, which I had not thought possible. His caption said, "No HOA, no rules about patio umbrellas. October 10th, recommend again." I printed this one too. The refrigerator is getting crowded, but I don't intend to take anything down. The second annual transparency report was published in July, and if anything it was more thorough than the first. Helen had added a section on reserve fund projections using a 5-year model and a chart comparing actual expenses to budgeted expenses going back to when the new board had taken over. The chart showed, with cheerful clarity, a straight line moving in the right direction. I complimented her on it at the August meeting. She said, "That's what the numbers look like when no one's stealing them." She said it quietly, to me specifically, with the measured satisfaction of a woman who understands that the work she's doing is the antidote to what came before. August came around again. 2 years since the asphalt night. I had not marked the first anniversary. It seemed like a thing you acknowledged privately rather than celebrated, and I treated the second one the same way. August came, and I was aware of the date, and I thought about the machinery and the smell and Diane's clipboard in the work light, and then I got up and made coffee and drove the kids to where they needed to go and did my work and came home and made dinner and did not give the anniversary more weight than it had earned by being 2 years gone. In September, the HOA welcomed its first resident-elected ombudsman, a role the board had created at the spring meeting to handle complaints independently of the board itself. The first person elected to the role was a retired HR director named Clarence Washington, who had moved to Maplewood Ridge 4 years ago and had, by his own account, sat on the sidelines for too long. He brought to the role the precise combination of procedural knowledge and human attentiveness that the role required. His first act was to publish a clear, plain English description of the complaints process so that anyone, regardless of their familiarity with HOA governance, could understand what to do if something wasn't right. I thought about the widow who had been fined for wind chimes and hadn't known who to complain to or whether complaining was even possible. I thought about Thomas Greer, afraid in 2016, keeping his binder in a cabinet because the structure gave him no clear path. I thought about how much of Diane's power had depended on people not knowing their options, not having language for what was wrong, not being able to see a path from here to better. Clarence Washington and his plain English complaints process was the structural answer to all of that. Small, institutional, unglamorous, exactly right. In October, the HOA voted to donate a portion of the restitution recovery. Specifically, the interest that had accrued on the reserve account since the funds were restored, to a fund that would cover legal fees for HOA residents in future disputes with the board. The idea had come from Priya. Passed unanimously. I voted yes and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Proud of the community. Not of what we had survived, but of what it had chosen to build from the surviving. That distinction felt important. Dana said, when I told her about the legal fee fund vote, "That's the right move." I said, "I know." She said, "Now the next person doesn't have to have a forensic accountant in the family." I said, "They still have to have Priya." She said, "Everyone should have Priya." That is, in my experience, empirically correct. The leaves came down in October and November the way they always do in our part of the country. Suddenly, brilliantly, then gone, leaving the crabapple trees bare again at the road entrance. I knew by now that the bare trees were the winter version and the blooming trees were the spring version, and both were good and both were mine to drive past. The road ran straight and clear through the fallen leaves, and the drainage handled the November rains the way I had designed it to, and the gravel packed firm under the weight of the cars that used it every day, and nothing about it called attention to itself because nothing about it needed to. That is the best possible outcome for infrastructure. Invisibility through function. A road that works is a road you don't notice. You notice the road when it fails, when it floods or crumbles or is taken from you in the night. When it works, you just drive on it, walk on it, ride your bike on it, go where you're going. The road disappears into the background of a life that moves. I wanted that. I built for that. We now have that. The road is invisible. The road is working. The road is fine. 3 years after the asphalt night, I drove the full perimeter of Maplewood Ridge on a Sunday morning in August, just to see it, all of it, the way you circle something to understand it whole. The subdivision in the morning light. 47 houses in good repair, gardens and lawns and driveways, and the occasional garden gnome that nobody was going to fine anyone for, and the community garden near the clubhouse with its late summer abundance, and the lit walking path and the crabapple trees and the road at the eastern edge that I could see from the circular route like a spine running north to south, holding the eastern boundary in place. It looked like a neighborhood. That is, I know this sounds obvious, genuinely remarkable. It looked like a neighborhood is supposed to look. Tended, varied, ordinary, lived in, belonging to the people who live in it rather than to the idea of itself that one person had decided it should embody. It looked like a place where people were allowed to be different from each other in small ways that didn't threaten anything. Wind chimes and flagpoles and herb gardens and crabapple trees. The ordinary diversity of people making their homes. I drove past Diane's old house, the house that had sold the previous October, that now had a new family in it. There was a kid's bicycle on the front porch and a wreath on the door and a cheerful chaos of shoes by the mat, visible from the street, that suggested a household running at full capacity. Normal life occupying the space where a fiefdom had been. Nature healing, or whatever the neighborhood equivalent is. I finished the circuit and came home and parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a moment. Justice was at the window, tracking my arrival with her trademark intensity. The morning was warm and the light was good and the road stretched east, visible from the driveway, gravel and drainage and the slope I had engineered to carry the water away. Mine. Good. Done. I got out of the car and Justice hit me at the door with the full enthusiasm of a dog who has been waiting an amount of time that she wishes you to understand was considerable. I scratched her ears and went inside and made a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the Sunday paper, which I still take in physical form because I am 45 years old and some things you just do. Dana came downstairs and poured her own coffee and sat across from me, and we read in companionable silence, the way we have done on Sundays for 15 years. The house was quiet with the particular Sunday morning quality. Slightly slower, slightly gentler, the week not yet pressing in from the edges. Owen was still asleep. Lily had a friend over who was also still asleep, presumably, given the absence of sound from upstairs. Justice had returned to her post at the window. Dana looked up at some point and said, "You drove the whole perimeter this morning." It was not a question. I said, "Yeah." She said, "How does it look?" I said, "Good." She said, "It should." She went back to her paper. I went back to mine. The coffee was good. The light was good. The road outside was fine. The neighborhood was better. We were here. The 3-year mark passed quietly, as the previous anniversary had. I was not a person who marked difficult anniversaries with ceremony. It felt like giving the difficulty more real estate in the present than it had earned. What I did instead was go to the HOA's 3rd annual transparency report presentation in Helen Park's capable hands, and note with satisfaction that the report was now 14 pages, which was 2 pages longer than the first one but felt proportionate to the growing detail and ambition of what Maplewood Ridge was now capable of accounting for. The report's final page was a letter from the board to the membership, something Helen had added this year at Priya's suggestion, thanking residents for their engagement and their trust and their willingness to show up, month after month, and participate in the collective work of governing a community responsibly. It was not a dramatic letter. It was not self-congratulatory. It said what needed to be said, clearly and directly, without pretending the past had not happened or that the present had arrived without effort. I read that letter 3 times. I thought it was the right document for the moment. I thought Helen had gotten the tone exactly right, the tone of a place that knows where it has been and has decided deliberately to be somewhere better. That kind of knowing is not comfortable, but it is honest, and honest is the foundation everything else rests on. In the spring of the 3rd year, the state legislature passed a bill, a version amended and debated and shaped by the process that all legislation goes through, that increased HOA financial oversight requirements, shortened the response window for official complaints, and established a state-level ombudsman office for HOA disputes. Ray's written comments were cited in the legislative record. Dana's methodology was referenced in the accompanying fiscal analysis. I was listed in the acknowledgments as a witness whose testimony had contributed to the committee's understanding of the issue. It was a brief mention in a formal document that most people would never read. I read it 3 times. I called Ray when I saw it. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "You know what this means?" I said, "What?" He said, "The next person dealing with a Diane Holloway has a state ombudsman they can call." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's the whole thing right there." I said, "That's the whole thing." He said, "Pam wants to know if you and Dana want to come to dinner next Saturday." I said we would absolutely be there. We went to dinner. We ate well and laughed a great deal and did not, for the entire 4 hours, discuss Diane Holloway or the HOA or the asphalt or any of it. We talked about Owen's telescope project, which had evolved from the original instrument into an ongoing interest that now included a subscription to a sky-watching app and a plan to attend a star party at a dark sky site upstate. We talked about Lily's soccer trajectory and whether she might play competitively in high school. We talked about Ray's grandkids and Pam's garden and a vacation property they were thinking about buying somewhere in the mountains. On the drive home, Dana said, "That's what it should always feel like." I said, "Dinner with friends?" She said, "Dinner with friends where you don't have to talk about the thing the whole time, because the thing is over." I said, "Yeah." She said, "We earned this." I said, "We absolutely did." The crabapple trees bloomed again in April of the 3rd year. For springs now, since I had watched the machinery roll in at 1:47 a.m. and the whole chain of events had begun. The trees did not know this. They bloomed because it was April and they were crabapple trees, and blooming in April is what crabapple trees do when the conditions are right. The conditions were right. They bloomed. Thomas Greer, passing by on his morning walk, stopped to look at them and then looked at me. I was walking Justice, coming back from the North Gate, and said simply, "Good trees." I said, "Good trees." Lily made varsity soccer her freshman year of high school, which I was not surprised by and which I celebrated with the contained enthusiasm of a parent who has learned that the appropriate amount of excitement for a 15-year-old's achievement is roughly 40% of what you actually feel. Owen, who is 13 now, is building a second telescope, a larger one with a 10-inch mirror, in a methodical collaboration with a friend from school who turns out to be equally serious about optics. The garage has become a workshop of quiet, careful work. I am available for engineering consultation when asked, which is regularly. Dana took on a new case in January of the third year that she describes as the most complex thing I've worked on in a decade, which is saying quite a lot. She works later than she used to, but she comes home with the specific energy that the work she finds hard and meaningful generates in her, and we have learned over 15 years to read each other's work energy and give it the space it needs. Some weeks I cook. Some weeks she does. The kids have learned to cook a few things in self-defense. This seems like appropriate life preparation. Justice is 3 now, which is to say she has been auditing my road every morning for 3 years and has yet to find it satisfactory in any permanent sense, because the road is always new to her in the morning, always requiring fresh investigation, always potentially hiding something that a thorough nose-to-ground survey might reveal. I appreciate her dedication. I think of her sometimes as the road's unofficial inspector. More thorough than the county, more consistent than any contractor, present every single day without exception or complaint. In the fall of the third year, I went back to the county road department and spoke with the same inspector who had signed off on the original road construction 8 years ago. He was still there, a compact, practical man named Dennis who remembered the road and remembered the legal fight, because apparently it had been something of a discussion at the department. He said, "How's it holding up?" I said, "Drainage is perfect. Surface is tight. Grade is correct." He nodded like a man who had expected nothing less. He said, "Good road." I said, "Yes, it is. I have been thinking in the past year about building something else. Not a road, the road is done, the road is fine, but something on the property that has been in the planning stage in the back of my mind for a while. A small workshop addition off the garage where Owen and I can work on the telescope and on whatever comes after the telescope. A proper workspace with good lighting and a workbench and storage designed around what we actually use. Built right, built to last, built for the people who will use it. The permit application is straightforward. A residential addition, no complications. I filled it out one evening at the kitchen table and noted, not for the first time, that the county's permit process is more transparent and more navigable than it was even 3 years ago. Someone has been improving things. Small improvements, incremental, the kind that don't make the news but make the difference between a process that serves the public and one that frustrates it. Better is enough to work with. The workshop permit was approved in 30 days. I broke ground on a Saturday in October. Owen was there with his work gloves on, serious about the project. Lily came out to watch for a while and then went back inside to video call her soccer teammate, which is correct behavior for a 15-year-old on a Saturday. Dana brought coffee at noon. The foundation went in level, which I took as a good sign. By November, the framing was up. By December, it was enclosed. We worked on it through the winter, weekends and evenings, Owen and I, with the particular companionship of working alongside your kid on something real, where the work teaches as much as any instruction could, and the shared effort produces something more than the thing being built. We talked about optics and engineering and school and his friends and the telescope and what he thought he might want to study eventually, which is a conversation that has multiple parts over many years, and this was one of the middle parts, comfortable and unhurried. The workshop was finished in February. We stood in it on the first evening it was complete, with the lighting on and the benches clear and the tools hung in their places, and Owen looked around and said, "This is good, Dad." I said, "Yes, it is." We stood there for a moment in the good light of a room we had built together, in the house we had fought to keep, on the road we had refused to lose, in the neighborhood we had chosen to stay in and had helped make better. Some moments contain everything. That was one of them. Spring comes again to Maplewood Ridge. The crabapple trees bloom at the entrance to my road. 4 of them now. Thomas planted a 4th one the previous October, a variety with deep pink flowers that comes on a week later than the others, extending the bloom season by almost 10 days, which Thomas described as a small improvement that cost nothing and makes everything better. That is, I have come to understand Thomas Greer's entire operating philosophy, and it is an excellent one. Justice has her audit under control. The road passes inspection every morning. Helen Park published the 4th annual transparency report with a new section on 5-year capital planning. Clarence Washington's ombudsman function handled 11 complaints last year, all of which were resolved within 45 days, 7 of them in the residents' favor. Priya has now helped 5 other HOA communities establish similar transparency and oversight structures. Ray and Pam are planning a trip to Japan. Dana's complex case resolved with an outcome she is professionally satisfied with, which is the highest praise she gives to her own work. Lily is 16 and very good at soccer and has opinions about everything, which I find exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Owen is 14 and building his 3rd telescope, which he does not consider unusual and which I consider remarkable every single day. They both know, in the vague way that teenagers know things about their parents' histories, that something difficult happened when they were younger involving the neighborhood, and that we stayed and that things got better. That vague knowledge is enough. The details will be there when they want them, and they will want them eventually, and I will tell the story the way I have always tried to tell it. Accurately, without melodrama, giving everyone who was part of it the credit they're owed. Dana deserves most of the credit for the outcome. I will say that clearly here at the end of the story. The property dispute I fought. The legal fight Claire managed. The documentation Ray built and Thomas preserved. All of it was essential. But the thing that made the plea happen on the terms it did, the thing that transformed a property rights dispute into a fraud case with teeth, was 47 pages of forensic financial analysis built by a woman who does that work better than almost anyone and who did it, in this case, because it was the right thing to do and because she had found something she could not in good conscience not pursue. That is Dana. That is who I am married to. I am lucky, and I know it, and I say it out loud as often as I remember to. The road is mine. The morning is good. The neighborhood is better. The ordinary has returned to the people it belongs to. The fiefdom is gone, replaced by a community imperfect, engaged, governed by people who understand that governance is service, not power. The wind chimes ring. The flagpole flies. The herb gardens grow. The kids ride their bikes. The dog does her audit. The crabapple trees bloom. This is what we fought for. This exact thing. The unremarkable right to live in a place that serves the people in it. The right to wake up in the morning and have your coffee and watch the light and not feel the low-grade dread of whatever the next letter might bring. The right to build something with your own hands and your own money and your own careful attention to grade and drainage and structural integrity, and to have it stay built and to see it used and to know that it serves the people who need it. We have all of that. We have had it back for 3 years now, with the particular richness that things have when you know what they cost and what it took to keep them. I do not take a single morning for granted. I do not drive past the crabapple trees without seeing them. I do not walk the road without feeling, somewhere underneath the ordinary, the specific gratitude of someone who had to fight for the ordinary and knows, therefore, exactly what it's worth. It is worth everything. It always was. I just know it better now. Diane Holloway is serving her probation. Where she is exactly, I don't know. What she does with her days, I don't know. Whether the letter she wrote, the one on personal stationery, the one I keep in the folder, represents a genuine reckoning or a passing moment of clarity that has since been rationalized away, I cannot know from the outside and won't pretend to. What I know is that she is out there, living her smaller life, and that the $412,000 she took is slowly coming back to the community she took it from, and that the community is using it wisely, transparently, in the full light of a governance structure that makes every expenditure visible, to make the neighborhood better in the small, continuous, unglamorous way that good communities make themselves better. That is the closing of the loop. Not her suffering, I don't require her suffering. Not her regret, though I believe from that letter that it's real. What closes the loop is the money coming back, the oversight structures in place, the record entered into the state legislative proceedings, the ombudsman's phone line, Helen's 14-page annual report, and the crabapple trees blooming at the entrance to a road that belongs to its owner and serves its community and does not need anyone to defend it at 2 in the morning anymore. What closes the loop is the ordinary, restored to the people it belongs to. That is the ending. That is the karma. That is the justice, not dramatic, not cinematic, but real and durable and built to last. Like a good road. Like a well-placed tree. Like a record that exists because people who were angry and careful and stubborn made it exist, and left it there for the next person who would need it. The morning after the asphalt night, all 58 families woke up to find that Diane's crew had used my road to access their properties for the overnight work, and in doing so, driving heavy equipment over privately held easements without authorization, had left a paper trail of trespass that Claire would later characterize as a gift. When I sent the email at 10:17 a.m. with Dana's 2-page financial summary, 43 of those 58 families responded. When the contempt ruling came down, 51 of them attended the next HOA meeting. When the plea was announced, every single one of them, I know because Helen tracked it, received the official board notification within 24 hours and the majority confirmed receipt. 58 families. 58 ordinary households doing their ordinary things, working, raising kids, maintaining their properties, paying their dues, going to sleep at a reasonable hour, who had been living, for varying numbers of years, in a neighborhood shaped by one person's decision that her authority was more important than their rights, and who woke up one morning in August to find that the person who had taken their neighbor's road was now accountable, demonstrably, publicly, in a court of law, to the community she had been exploiting. That accountability is what the 58 cars disappearing from Diane's reach really meant. Not literal disappearance, the cars were still there in 58 driveways. What disappeared was her authority over them. Her ability to find their owners arbitrarily, to route their access roads according to her preferences, to hold their community infrastructure hostage to her whims. The power disappeared. The control disappeared. The fiefdom, which had seemed as permanent as anything could seem in a place people had lived for years, disappeared in the morning light of a Tuesday in August, as quickly and completely as the certainty that had built it. And in its place, nothing dramatic, just the ordinary. Just 58 families in 58 houses on several streets in a subdivision with a community garden and a lit walking path and a 14-page annual report and an ombudsman's phone line and a road at the eastern edge that belongs to its owner and is open to the people who need it. Just Maplewood Ridge doing what a neighborhood is supposed to do, holding the people in it up, not down. I love this neighborhood. I did not know 6 years ago when we moved in that I would feel that way, that the fight would bond me to the place rather than driving me away from it. But that is what happened. I know this place. I know its history and its failures and its capacity for both cowardice and courage, sometimes in the same people at different moments. I know its particular quality of late summer evenings and the sound Mrs. Beaumont's wind chimes make when the breeze moves through them in sequence. I know the way the crabapple trees bloom and the way the road drains and the way the light comes through the kitchen window at 7 a.m. on a clear morning in any season. I know it because I stayed. Because we all stayed. Those of us who had the wherewithal to stay and the stubbornness to fight and the good fortune to have what the fight required. And because staying, in the end, was the right choice, the choice that made this the place it is now rather than the place it was. That is the story. 47 pages and a camera on a fence post and a 3-year file and an 8-year binder and an emergency motion and 58 neighbors who chose, at the right moment, to be a community rather than a collection of people quietly suffering under the same thumb. That is the story. It is also, and I mean this without any irony at all, a very good road. Justice has completed her morning audit. The road passes inspection. The crabapple trees are coming into bloom early this year. The mild March has pushed the schedule up by 10 days, which Thomas predicted with the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows his trees. The neighborhood is waking up. Somewhere 2 streets over, someone has started a lawnmower. A kid is riding a bike on the path, going fast in the morning quiet, going somewhere. Dana has coffee ready. Owen slept late because it is Saturday and he is 14 and sleeping late is among his fundamental rights, which I defend with the same commitment I bring to actual property rights because the principle is similar. Lily is already up. She has a soccer practice at 9, eating cereal and checking her phone with the efficient multitasking of a 16-year-old who is always already somewhere else in her attention even when she is present in the room. I am in the kitchen. I am having my coffee. I am watching the light come across the property at the angle I have memorized. The road is there, at the eastern edge, gravel and drainage and 3 years of proving that it belongs to me and serves the people who need it. Justice is at the door, ready to begin her audit of a Saturday morning that holds, from her perspective, considerable promise. I will open the door for her in a moment. I will walk the road with her in the April morning, in the good light, past the crabapple trees that are coming into bloom 10 days early this year, through the ordinary world that we fought to get back to and are lucky enough to live in. I will walk it from one end to the other and stand at the north gate for a moment and look back at the whole length of it, and it will look exactly like what it is, a road that works. Then I will go back inside and pour a second cup of coffee and sit at the table with Dana and whatever the morning brings next. Maybe Owen will wake up and have opinions about the telescope. Maybe Lily will come home from soccer practice with news. Maybe it will just be a Saturday, a sequence of ordinary hours doing ordinary things in a house we chose and kept and are glad to be in. All of it. I will take all of it. The morning always comes. The road holds. The ordinary is worth fighting for. And here, on this April Saturday in Maplewood Ridge, with the crabapple trees blooming at the entrance to a road that is mine and a dog at the door and coffee on, the counter and the people I love somewhere in the house. Here is the proof of that, as clear and gravel solid and well-drained as anything I have ever built. The END.